Well, the Isle of Man's been coming under all sorts of pressure recently. There's been mentions of the G8, and of course the whole future of how the Isle of Man should do business has been brought into the forefront now of what's going on in the economic world, not just, of course, in the British Isles, but much further afield. But the Institute of Economic Affairs have just released a booklet about how they view the Isle of Man and other so-called tax havens as a benefit to the economy of the UK. Dr Davies is joining us now via Skype. Can you outline exactly what you came up with in this pamphlet?
Well, there are two main points to take from Jamie Collier's report. The first is that, as you say, tax havens play an extremely important part in the economy, not just of the United Kingdom, but in fact the world as a whole. And the part that they play essentially is in providing an efficient and low-cost means of channeling savings into investment around the world without too much of that being capped up by government. This is the so-called tax avoidance side of the work that they do. The point at issue here is whether or not those funds would be more usefully employed if they were being invested and used by private firms and individuals, which is what we believe, or if they were being spent by governments, which many critics think they would be. Essentially, places like the Isle of Man or Jersey or Bermuda are the plumbing of the world financial system. They're the system which helps to route savings into areas where they're going to be most productive and avoid their being wasted on various kinds of frivolous public spending in many cases. So that's the first point that we make. One of the points that follows on from that is that it's often said that money is, quote, stashed away, unquote, in places like Douglas, when in fact, of course, this is nonsense. The money which is deposited in bank accounts in the Isle of Man and elsewhere is, of course, being lent out and invested in doing productive work. So that's the first major kind of point that we're making. The second is that a lot of the noise that's being made at the moment is highly hypocritical because, for one thing, governments and politicians have been frantically trying and competing to bring footloose international capital into their own jurisdictions for over 20 years now, which is in fact reasonable public policy on their part. So for them to pretend that they are shocked, just shocked to find that a lot of this money is being routed through tax havens is simply disingenuous. They knew perfectly well that this was going on. The second thing is that to the extent there is a concern that large firms in particular are successfully getting around the obligations that politicians thought they put on them, the reason for this is the fact that politicians in most countries have made the tax system excessively complicated and have created all kinds of perfectly legal ways to reduce your tax liability, which, not surprisingly, companies and individuals have taken advantage of.
Now, this flies in the face of the sort of PR aspect that the UK government, amongst others, is putting out. And, I mean, this is quite refreshing from our point of view, but how's it been received?
Well, in some ways, better than you might imagine, because I think there is a kind of general tendency to perhaps think that when everyone and every media outlet you hear is saying one thing, that there must be something in the opposite side. On the other hand, it is fair to say that we are a minority voice at the moment, because right now there is a bit of a storm being whipped up by both campaigners, or fair dues to them, that's what they're trying to do, but more dishonestly by politicians who are, I think, really seeking to deflect attention from their own mismanagement by laying the blame upon other people who are, as I said, simply taking advantage of things they've done themselves in the past.
And bring it into layman's terms then, how do these offshore states help the UK? Is it just funneling the money then through from here to London, the City of London?
Essentially it is. What it is it provides a means for savings, not just from the UK, but from around the world in many cases, to be fed into investment opportunities in the UK, here in London, elsewhere in the world. Essentially, people who have surplus cash or large companies that have earnings from their trading activities can deposit them in bank accounts or declare profits in jurisdictions like the Isle of Man, subject to the taxes which those jurisdictions have in place, and then reuse them in other ways in other parts of the world. And this is a very efficient way of channeling capital, which is obviously a scarce resource, into areas where it's most productively used. Otherwise, it would tend to be confined to particular geographical jurisdictions, and in many cases that would make it much less productive than it would otherwise be.
And what's your view that, I mean, for instance, the UK has been reducing their corporation tax, and they're saying to the public that they're going out there to fight for more business, and they are themselves therefore seen as a low jurisdiction for tax in places?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there are quite a number of jurisdictions which, according to many definitions, would count as tax havens, including the United Kingdom, several states of the United States, Luxembourg, and a whole number of other large sovereign nations. The point is that governments all over the world are competing for both international capital and also skilled international people, lest we forget. And essentially what they're doing is they're competing by offering basically public services in a business environment at a reasonable price, and the taxes and charges that they levy are essentially the price that people pay for having these other benefits. Now, if governments feel that they have set the price too low, if you will, then what they need to do is to change the laws. And that's quite a simple matter. They should actually take the responsibility themselves and do that, rather than putting the blame on small jurisdictions such as the Isle of Man.
Now, there's one big dark cloud on the horizon, the Vickers report, the Vickers review into how money in the future should be channeled into the City of London. And this could really have massive consequences for the Crown dependencies and offshore territories, yes?
Well, it could do. It depends on how the banking industry in the UK is regulated in the future, depending on what parts of the report are put into effect. My own view, actually, is that the technical side of this is so difficult and complicated, and also so subject to negotiation at a higher level with European partners, that a lot of what's being proposed is actually not going to happen. That's my own particular view, anyway.
So, overall, should we be worried?
Well, it depends what happens at the highest level. I tend to think that in the longer term, maybe in the medium term, no, places like Douglas or Jersey should not be that worried. However, in the short term, when there is a bit of a storm brewing up, it's a matter ultimately of how things go on at the very highest level of politics and geopolitics, and very sordid geopolitics, I'm afraid, has as much to do with that as economics. So we might have a rough couple of years ahead of us, but I think that in the longer run, the logic of economics is going to trump these political considerations.